That kind of advice.
Okay, folks, I'm going to call our meeting to order. This is the June 18th meeting of the Addison Central School District Board, and we'll open with a quick round of introductions here at the table. If you wouldn't mind beginning, Davina.
Davina Damery.
Peg Martin. Victoria Jetty.
Chip Malcolm. Perry Hansen.
Peter Burrows, Superintendent.
I'm Peter Conlon.
Jen Newceder.
Thanks. We have a section in our agenda for public comment. I know most folks here are to hear the report of the task force, but I didn't know if there was any other public comment to come before the board this evening. Seeing none, we'll move along. Looking for a motion to approve the minutes of June 4th.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any changes that people would like to make? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes for June 4th, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anybody want to abstain? All right. Well, that was easy. Okay, one more piece of business before we get to the main topic at hand. Chip, report on bills.
2 weeks of bills on the 11th of June. Victoria and Mary read the bills, and there was director's orders of $99,873.65. There was an April bank fee of $40 and payroll expenses of $1,004,314.28 for a total of $1,104,227.93. And today, the 18th, Victoria and I read the bills. There were director's orders of $237,369.45 and payroll-related expenses of $10,262.71 for a total of $247,632.16. I move that we pay the bills.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the bills as reported. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? We have paid the bills. All right, so on to our report from the ACSD Task Force on Racism, Bias, and Inclusion report. Before we get started, just want to say at the outset to all of you who have participated in this, on behalf of this board, we greatly appreciate your work, your time. This has been a challenging topic. You have all volunteered hours and hours, and frankly, the report we received is extremely comprehensive, very easy to follow, has great detail, and I'd say went above and beyond what would have been expected for a group of volunteers who were meeting as they could. So just want to set the baseline here of a great level of appreciation, and turn the floor over to whoever might be presenting, but I do hope that you'd take a moment and introduce the members of the board, and then those of you who speak, introduce yourselves as well.
Thank you, Peter.
No, I just have to somehow read that. Victoria can probably stand on her chair. Got it? Thank you.
Well.
It is blinking.
It's warming up.
Well, while it's warming up, I'll take the opportunity. My name is Chris Francoeur. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the principal of Moms. And I have had the honor, privilege, and the learning experience of serving as one of the co-chairs of the ACSD Task Force on Racism, Bias, and Discrimination. And we formed as a group in September. We stood outside in the parking lot after a board meeting and said, we're sure this can be done in a couple of meetings. And months later, many hours of time together, we have come together tonight to present our report on our recommendations to the board. And with that, I'm going to ask the members here tonight. Not all of our members were able to be with us tonight, but to introduce themselves.
I'm Meg Baker. I'm a parent, and I'm the pre-K coordinator for this district as well as the other two districts.
Hi everyone, I'm Elaine Orozco Hammond. I have a child, and Mary Hogan,
a graduate of MUMS and one at the high school. So. I'm Karen Gutentag. I am a parent of a rising third grader at Mary Hogan, and I work in Middlebury College.
I'm Christina Johnston. I'm principal of Bakerage Elementary School.
I'm Courtney Cron, and I'm a curriculum coordinator in the district.
And I'm Miguel Fernandez. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer at Middlebury College and have just graduated twin boys from the high school.
We also, as noted in our report, other members, we have many other committed members of our committee, not all of whom could be here tonight. And back in September, the board handed us the charge that the ACSD task force will provide recommendations to the board to support the district in addressing explicit and implicit bias in all forms in our schools. And that's what we worked to do over the course of this school year. We did research. We had Rebecca Haslam come in and provide us with input. We spent a lot of time looking at our own views and how we wanted to create a culture within all of our schools. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the committee.
So as Chris said, we did a lot of research, a lot of input from the members of the committee. We had some invaluable input from one of the students too, that I think was really wonderful. And as a result of this work, the task force developed 3 goals. And put them up there. Competency, community collaboration and decision making, and communication. And within each of these goals, the task force has developed a set of desired outcomes we'd like to see, some strategic initiatives, and then some specific action steps to be taken. Now, why or how did we arrive at these goals? In part, as many of you were present for that first meeting that brought the task force together, where we're all aware that there have been issues nationally around the areas of bias, discrimination, and racism. But also we heard from many families in the area that local equity issues are an urgent concern for folks. And you heard a lot of compelling stories from our local population around those issues. There's also desire to be a better school system. And we also see a compelling opportunity to incorporate progress in these areas into the systems change related to the IB implementation. In particular, there's a natural harmony between that international mindedness, that open-mindedness, and equity literacy that we talk about in the report. On top of that, we share the strategic vision outlined in the ACSD strategic plan that says, quote, all students will reach their full academic potential and be prepared for success as engaged citizens, end of quote. And our plan supports the development of skills and systems to address this vision by helping ensure that, we have a few bullet points, schools are open and welcoming to all students and their families, that learners can engage with diverse audiences in a respectful way, that learners are productive citizens, that learners can think critically about issues of social justice, and that staff are supported and have the skills to engage and educate all learners. And what we'd like to take is just have a couple of our colleagues talk briefly about each of the 3 goals that we've set up. We're not going to get into the details because it's quite extensive, as those of you who've seen the report see. So, Courtney, are you going to take the competency, right?
Yep. Well, Miguel, I think, did a really thorough job covering what some of our main goals are around competency. But under this goal, we looked at how can we all become more culturally competent, and by all of us, we looked into from the ground up, from the board to our administration, to our teachers, to our students, to our families, and how can we really all be in this discussion together and working towards the same goals. And I think for those different demographics, there was maybe a more clear path than for others. We talked a lot about sustained cultural competency, so how can we make this an ingrained mission for our district and not a one-off or just a quick training that we forget. And then, as Miguel mentioned, we talked about how can this work interface with IB's focus and their standard on commonality, diversity, and multiple perspectives, which is a requirement of IB. So, like Miguel said, there's a harmony there, and how can we set goals for all of us for what does it mean to be culturally competent, and then how can that work in getting there dovetail with IB so it's not two separate things we're endeavoring at once.
So the other thing that we looked at in community collaboration and decision-making was thinking about reaching out of our school district to the resources that we have both within our local community and on a more state, national, and international level, to do some strategic assessment around where our strengths are, where areas of challenge might be, and getting multiple perspectives involved in that process so that there are high levels of engagement within our local community around these issues. And so to create those partnerships and to also look at creating a shared understanding around issues of bias and bullying and harassment. We spent some time talking about making sure that incidents of bullying and harassment are handled equitably both within different schools in our area and that the communication of those incidents transfers between schools as children move on. But also thinking about those issues in a much more broad way and in a broader context, not as necessarily individual incidents, but as indicators of the school's climate.
And lastly, I think it goes without saying that all of the recommendations that we had in the first two sections really rely not only on being effective in and of themselves, but on great communication with the broader community about what's happening and what their role can be in those processes and what they can expect. In this area, communication, we focused on two discrete sections. The first was a number of the recommendations in the first two sections were very specific to how we handle incidents of potential bias, incidents that arise that are concerning, that may involve individual or systemic bias, and do we have good systems and structures in place both to prevent it from happening in the first place, but also to provide appropriate responses and investigations and support and follow-up. So our first recommendation in the communication area was really around making sure that not only are we doing great work, but that the communication is happening to the broader community so that they get a sense of confidence and understanding about how the district handles those things, so that they know in advance what conduct is expected and what conduct does this district believe is unacceptable. What should they do if they experience any of that conduct? What can they expect from the process? How do they report it? And what can they expect from it? As well as communicating that really clearly to the broader community. When incidents happen, here's what you may expect from us, here's what we're not going to share with you, but here's what we will share with you for the benefit of the broader community if we do identify that there are trends or issues that the broader community really needs to understand and be aware of so that we all have an accurate and shared understanding of what the climate is in the community. And the second bullet is really about using communication strategically to create a deeper sense of inclusion for certainly all of these recommendations, but really district-wide for all of the work, taking a space to really think strategically about how do the members of our community communicate? What languages do they use? What is their level of literacy? How do disabilities within our community keep people from participating How do our communication systems and structures advantage or disadvantage members of our community in really feeling plugged in to the concerns and opportunities that exist for their students and their families within the district? And doing a pretty thorough assessment of those communication mechanisms so that we can make choices to communicate optimally and as constituent appropriately as we possibly can, really recognizing the ways in which communication itself is a critical function to creating either inclusion or exclusion for the various constituencies.
So, thank you. That concludes our brief summary. You have a more extensive report in front of you, and we would certainly be happy to answer any questions you may have about the report, any questions about the process. Lots of us here to help with that.
Thank you very much. I'll kick things off. When we talk about, racism and discrimination, I think that we have a very clear idea of what that means. Bias is a little broader, and I'm just curious to know if the committee sort of discovered areas of bias that were unexpected, that you weren't expecting. I mean, is there a rural versus non-rural bias? Is there, are you hearing about those sorts of ones that may not have been at the top of the...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We absolutely did, and we actually, one day we had a conversation about what it said, the makeup of our committee, what our task force makeup. We had a very, very strong connection to Middlebury College and sort of what was the underlying message in that. And we did talk about the rural versus more suburban areas. We talked about levels of education. We talked about all of those pieces openly and wrestled with them. Yes.
I think the other thing that we wrestled with was we were hearing a lot of stories, but we weren't conducting a complete equity audit. And so you'll see in the recommendations that one of the very first things that we recommended was getting that sort of broader perspective, because we were also feeling as though we weren't capturing everything that might be out there.
I think one of the other points in terms of potential bias or the ways in which group membership or exclusion can function here is we recognize what a small community we are and how certain relationships or the perception of certain relationships can really influence people's comfort level around reporting issues of concern or their expectations about what may happen, and needing to be thoughtful about acknowledging that.
And I'll just add there, going back to the other parts, is there's oftentimes a relationship between that and that rural town, but more so a socioeconomic, right? Another division, and that sense of comfort with who's reporting what to whom can present certain numbers.
Yes, Meg.
In your report, you referred to an audit, and there's some letters M something something, E something something, which I don't know what they stand for. But an audit would consist of what, and how would it be done? It strikes me this is a pretty tricky thing to do.
There are models out there where an outside consultant comes in and helps guide an organization or a community through an equity audit. And in our work with Rebecca Haslam, the equity audit format that is referenced in the report was one that she recommended as most appropriate for use in an area such as ours.
I'll also add one of the things that's not in our report is that I'd say really in our first 3 months, the entire membership of the task force assembled a folder of a variety of resources, whether they were audit models or curricula or even grant possibilities or articles that were especially helpful. And I realize we didn't reference that at all in the report, but those are all things that we'd love to be able to provide to the board as you contemplate this work.
So I'm assuming in an audit, and it just strikes me as being a tricky thing to do, there would be a good deal, there would have to be a lot of outreach. and
Yes.
somehow an organization to make that happen and to get to those pockets of people who you are saying you
Yes.
don't necessarily represent. Yeah.
Yes.
So, go ahead.
We should get a link for you, it's the Mid-Atlantic Equity Consortium, and there's the audit is on that site, so you can see
Okay.
what that looks like. And it is a single example, but it's a very thorough job.
Mid-Atlantic Equity?
Yes. Consortium.
Consortium.
So the term equity has come up a bit, and right at the beginning, you talked about local equity issues. I was just wondering if you could give a couple of examples, made up or real, but just sort of to give us a good handle on what that means.
I think,
I'll say, people who can't access communications because they don't have computers.
Okay.
Or they're not comfortable reading English or communicating in English, or they don't have regular mailing addresses to receive postal mailings.
So really, you're talking in part about things that are outside, really, the school building, the school grounds, but more for the folks, the parents, the people, the constituencies of the school.
That would be just one example.
Yeah,
I think probably we understood it both as in the broader community as well as within the school system.
Great, thank you.
Equity can be seen a lot broader too. You know, within the school, it might be something like access. So, you know, does somebody with disabilities have equal access to all materials, to all types of teaching, to all activities? Another part of equity can be in the curriculum, right? And is there equal access for everyone in the curriculum? And then you can start to expand into, are people seeing themselves represented in that curriculum in different ways? So the equity it's a pretty packed term, as usual. As you noticed.
Just an example from the equity audit is one where do bulletin board illustrations and other visual materials depict females and males of various racial, ethnic, age, and disability groups in a variety of roles. That would be something we would really need to look at.
Thank you. Further questions? I'd open it up. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just waiting for the point. First, I want to thank everyone and echo what Peter said earlier about all the work that you did. I kind of heard whispers throughout the time and know that you all are tackling something that's really, really challenging work, and it's hard to consolidate it because it's so expansive. And when I got the report, I was really thrilled just to see how it was broken out. I think the 3 goals make a lot of sense in terms of how they're structured. And I really like that it's systems-based and it's not an overlay on top of another system, but it's thinking about who we are and where we're going and incorporating that into the work. So I just want to mention that. I had one question about the bias response team and the district equity team, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how you see those 2 groups interacting, how you see them kind of developing.
We had a number of conversations about how those groups might interface with existing groups. And I think that in part we left the language somewhat vague because we felt as though that was something that we needed additional input on in terms of how to streamline that and make it as inclusive and efficient as possible.
Yeah, but I would say that a bias response team is really intended to be that, to respond to particular incidents and be thinking broadly about what are the needs of all of the constituencies in a moment like this, and to be kind of a coordinating body, whereas an equity team is ongoing work in a really proactive way, ideally.
So one's more of a response to a specific incident or a series of incidents?
So a big part of it is communication. In other words, one of the issues, oftentimes we heard that an issue would occur somewhere and a school would take care of it. But people heard rumors about it, but of course nothing's said about it. It's dealt with. And it's a tricky balance in the privacy piece and what have you. So a bias response team can, in some ways, address an issue without, in a way that can be talking, so you might
Kind
not.
of generalizing it.
Generalizing it,
Yeah.
making people aware of something that happened, and talking about why something is unacceptable, and possibly some ways of moving forward or addressing the issue. Because if we don't talk about it, then the perception is that it's acceptable.
So,
Yes, Jim?
because that was a question I had too regarding the sort of dealing with incidents which become both teaching, if that's it's not the right word, but in that response, what I gather from what you're saying is that if the bus driver says this event occurred and it was obviously discriminatory, biased, however all of us would agree with that, then in fact that gets reported to the principal potentially or to the superintendent, and then the superintendent carries out into the team. Is that what I'm gathering? I guess I'm trying to understand. I understand what it means, but I don't know the process as how it,
What we
at
had
least in
talked about
response.
specifically in terms of the bias response team, and I'll use the middle school as an example, would be that if the middle school had a couple examples of, say, homophobic language, that the middle school admin team, we would follow the district's and the state's procedures and protocols for an investigation, for reporting out, for any consequences for that. But the bias response team would then look at what is it that's going on that we have some of this cropping up, and how can
Okay.
we then come in and work in a broader sense. And if you look in terms of the recommendations about building time into our schedules for those difficult conversations with students, and for opening those pieces up, that the bias response team would help give some guidance
Okay.
to them.
So that's different from when an incident is
Right.
reported, and then
Right.
there's a specific process, and that's addressed some as well. Because we really talked about the fact that right now it goes to, it's building by building.
Right.
And it actually is a very fine-tuned, time-consuming process, one for which as much training as we get, we don't have enough training or time to do that. So the idea was to really develop a team that would be involved in investigations.
Okay.
and have
No,
the
I understand that for sure. I would think that would be,
So that would be
Would be
another
helpful.
interface with the other team.
So I know that in conversations I've had with board members about it, sort of the question comes up, okay, now we have this report, very complete, very appreciative of all the work, now what? And I think it's probably something that we'll discuss as a board, but I was curious to know from an administrative point of view, where you see this document now taking us.
Well, I think the structure of it is basically makes it perfectly overlay with the strategic plan. And I think tying it to that work, which really it should be part of the strategic plan, it's kind of our fourth foundational goal in a way. I would see using the process we use for the strategic plan in looking at a mid-year and end-of-year report on this. I think part of the work we'll do over the summer with our administrative team is looking at the report more in depth to look at, as Meg was mentioning, the systems that we currently have in place, to see how it fits together, and start to map out, over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, how does the work best fit with the other work that we're doing, so that we're moving it along in a way that, as we mentioned, is not an overlay, but is really at the core of what we're doing. And we already are starting some of this work. We have a training on Friday with Rebecca Haslam, our administrative team does. We have another training with her in August. So working on that competency side. And we'll be talking, and our two administrators on the task force are going to be critical in helping us to craft, I think, the knowledge and experience of this group in thinking forward to next year about the work that we're going to do. And we have a lot of resources as well at the college too. I know that was mentioned earlier, and it's a huge resource. So we're working with Middlebury faculty as well, and having ongoing conversations to hopefully get some more PD resources as well next year.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, first of all, now that I'm sitting back here, if you guys don't talk loudly enough. it's really
Well,
hard.
usually there's an amplification system, it's just not hooked up to me.
Yeah, okay. It's really hard to hear you, Peter.
Okay.
So, but I just want to thank all of the task force members in particular. When I was sitting up at that table on the board, I was the board member who really pushed to have this task force created in response to constituency concerns in my own small town. And I am really thrilled to see it come to fruition. And thank you so much to all of you for the work you put into it, and to all those who aren't here. I just had a chance to read this afternoon, so I haven't fully absorbed it. But a couple things that came to mind was my concern about the timeline and making sure that this doesn't just sit on the shelf and not actually have something happen. I like the idea of an equity audit, and I was wondering what you guys see as the timeline for that, wanting it to not get stale as an idea. I also thought the section of the report, while there were lots of really great sections, the one section I thought that needed a little bit more meat was the section on hiring practices. It feels to me like hiring practices is kind of a low-hanging fruit, and it's not something that we address very well. We don't have a really robust human resources system here. We don't have a really robust sort of diversity in hiring practices here. And this year was, I don't know the results of the hiring process yet, but it was a year where we hired a lot of new teachers and staff. And I'm hoping that we took that opportunity to diversify our staff. I read this report or heard this report probably on NPR recently about how diversity training can only go so far, and it only has a very limited effect, that you can train, teachers and principals and administrators, and that will work for a little while, but unless there's actually shared experiences with diverse people, it's not going to stick. So it seems to me that hiring has to be something that we focus on, and making sure our students have diverse teachers and administrators and role models because we have an increasingly diverse student population, and our staff does not reflect the diversity of our students. So I would have liked to have seen a little bit more meat in that section. I was wondering about, those of you who know me will know why I'm asking about this, but the media section, wonder if there was a specific call out to being able to critically evaluate media, and I'm wondering if it also, I was hoping it also includes critically evaluating other texts and novels and other things that kids are interacting with, historical texts and things like that, beyond just calling out media. I'd like to see that broadened out so it doesn't feel like the blame game.
I think, Ruth, that media was specifically called out in that we felt that we were making progress overall in looking at, say, the texts and the novels, but that our students are inundated by media.
Absolutely.
How did we help with that?
Absolutely. I think there's still work to do in the other area too, though. But the thing that struck me the very most about this report was the low-hanging fruit of communication. I keep using that term because I kept checking in with members like Elaine and Meg in particular. Are you getting to the low-hanging fruit? There are some things that can be so easily done right away in our school system that we're just not doing well, and communication is the number one thing, period, overall, period. And it covers every single issue in our school district, whether it's diversity and bias and discrimination and racism or anything in our school district. Our school district does not do a good enough job of communicating with parents and the community and students and each other. And the board doesn't do a good enough job of communicating with the community. And so just across the board, no pun intended, the communication issue seems like something we can tackle immediately. And that would have a huge effect, like just starting next year with a different communication plan. And so that really just struck me as an important piece of the report. And I was really happy that you emphasized it as a whole section, because that just could solve so many problems across the board, and I really liked that. So I just wanted to say that. So thank you all for all of your work, and I really look forward to what comes next. And I will be sure to follow up with our superintendent to make sure it happens.
I hope so.
Further questions? Well, thank you all very much, and thanks for coming out on a hot night. At least you had an air-conditioned room to enjoy. And if you'd like to stick around while we award bids, you're more than welcome to, but you certainly needn't.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, a couple pieces of action here. Need to award a few bids. Bruce, are you all set to report out the depressing results of only getting one bidder once again?
It's depressing in that everybody, as far as contractors go, seem to be so incredibly busy. It's difficult to get them to even price out the work that you want done.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons we actually get this company to respond is because we use them pretty heavily in the high school, middle school already. So, and we're retying what work they're doing in with the existing system here. So, with that said, Temperature Controls of Vermont submitted bids for replacing the controls and some valving equipment as well. In both Bridport and Ripton Elementary Schools. Bridport School was to the tune of $43,750. Ripton Elementary is $48,400. The difference in pricing is really the condition of the items being replaced within the buildings. Both of these are fairly small systems, so this replacement includes all the heating valves throughout the building and some equipment in the boiler room. It's pretty extensive. It's a big chunk of work. So that's...
Was this in the ballpark of what you envisioned? Or because when I saw it, I thought, oh, that seems really big, but...
Yeah, it's roughly 10 to 12,000 more per building than I thought it would be.
Mm-hmm.
And that may be reflective of two things. One, just the environment that we're going out to bid in. You know, that makes it tough. And then another piece is just the condition of the systems in these two buildings. I intentionally picked the worst two buildings first. So I looked at the systems we had the most problems with. They were the most outdated technology. And that's why I chose these two buildings to upgrade.
This is heating and cooling control systems.
Heating and cooling control systems. I will say neither building has any.
You have to say heating. Yeah.
Yes, it's strictly heating systems.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
All right. How about a motion to approve the bid for Temperature Controls of Vermont for the two projects, one at Bridport, one at Ripton? Thank you.
Second.
Any further discussion? If we did nothing,
Right, yeah, that was my
what,
question.
If you did nothing, we would incur service calls, and we could keep the systems going. We might end up with an interruption, you know, for heat issues. We've been pretty good at not having that happen, just because we'll babysit things when we know there's an issue. In other words, myself or Eric Warren or the custodian at the building would be checking on it in the middle of the night and going in early to make sure that the building's warm before the kids are supposed to get there. So it takes a high level of focus to keep things up and open.
All right. Some people call that love.
It also takes me away from other things that I should be doing.
I think in Salisbury, the chair of the board used to at least go shovel the walk or...
He was the one that, he wasn't even the chair anymore, and he's the one that called in and said, you can't have school today, there's no power, there's a tree down.
Yes, he did.
All right, so we moved and seconded to accept the bid. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right. All done there. Oh, another bid. Next. All right.
This is round 2, though.
Yes, okay, so we're at round 2 of our transportation contract.
Yes.
Are you
So-
leading us, Brittany?
I'm sorry.
Are you leading us?
I am.
All
So before I start that conversation, I do have a few things that I wanted to pass around for board signature. It's the documentation that accompanies your tax anticipation note that was approved at the last meeting. So there's actually 3 places that need signature. One is the actual resolution the bank requires. One is the actual loan document. And the last is a non-arbitrage certificate, which basically outlines what we will use the funds for and says, you know, we can't make too much money off the debt, which we won't. So there's 3 different spots. So if I could just pass them around and you could get them. And then there is a spot on 2 of them for secretary/clerk. I don't know, are you acting in that capacity? Or,
Oh, me tonight? I'm not the official one.
So maybe I can
Sure.
call
That's all right, we can
Okay.
straight acting clerk.
Okay. All right. So I'll start here. So I did put
Actually, so it's
the,
probably the district clerk more than the board clerk. I think so, yeah.
one says secretary and then the other says clerk. I
think you're
I'm not
right.
sure why.
Yeah.
I did.
They don't know.
I think
More
it
than
would
I
be
signed up
Michelle.
for.
I
think it would be
transportation.
Michelle.
No,
Linda.
Linda. Linda's the district clerk.
Oh, clerk, sorry.
Yeah.
Treasurer.
I did get the new transportation models up on board pack. I do have
Yep.
them if anyone needs them. So essentially, when we presented, you know, our last round of models to you, we had a very short amount of time to really absorb the information. And so we were sort of giving you numbers based on model experiments, you know, of conceptually what it would look like. So since then, we've had time to actually sit down and have phone conference with Betcha and really kind of crunch some hard numbers. So here.
Do you have any of those copies? Are there
I
any
do.
others maybe?
Yep.
Please? Would you mind? Oh, right, Perry looks like he's gonna, can I get it with his pen?
I got it.
Here you go.
I have them, but there's some.
We didn't get this on video, though.
Can somebody?
We'll get it.
It's maroon.
Click it again.
We'll let Victoria reach for that too.
Okay, all right. So the top is as was originally proposed.
Victoria, would
except
you
for
slide
the
those
fact
papers down?
That there are 2 additional years. So the original bid was for 3 years, but we pretty much immediately realized that we needed to extend it to 5 years in order to spread the cost as much as possible. Also, it's unlikely that the situation would substantially change in the next 3 years in terms of another player coming in and being able to bid and bid competitively. So the total contract value over 5 years of what they originally proposed was about $5.8 million. And through conversations with them and sort of talking about what was reasonable and our desire to stay with them, but that we needed to negotiate, you know, a more reasonable price, they came down to a total contract value of basically $5,019,000. So over the next 5 years, they need us to pay them $5,019,000 unless we, you know, substantially change our routes, which again is something that we can look at in the future. But they don't care how we get there, basically. So we can pay all up front, we can pay, you know, at the back, we can spread it out. There's no interest built in. So it's really how we, you know, what's most palatable or what we think makes the most sense in terms of building our budgets over the next 5 years. So STA, Betcha, basically did a model for us where in FY19 we sort of take our normal 3% increase and then spread it evenly over the next 5 years. The other way that the board was interested in seeing was sort of pushing out as far as possible the increase. So I did a model, it's called Model 2, where basically in FY19 we do 2.5, FY20 7, then it goes up to 11. By the time we're at FY23, we're looking at close to an 18% increase. So I think that both models have some merit, but that Model 2, you know, because there's no interest, makes sense to push it out as far as possible and also gives us the most time and puts the most pressure on us to make some substantive changes and to look for some areas of efficiency in transportation or otherwise, because obviously we're moving into the 2nd year of your consolidation. So
Unification.
Unification, sorry. So that, you know, the efficiencies will become more apparent in other areas as well as transportation. So it gives us some time to evaluate how best to structure this. And it doesn't have to be these exact percentages. However, I will warn you that the smaller you make the increases in the earlier years, the more of a hit you're going to take at the end. So even though we hope that we'll find some savings before then, we also want to make it reasonable, I think, in your last year.
Could you explain a little bit more about how we got from 5.8 to
Sure.
5?
So essentially, through our conversations, Betcha agreed to reduce the cost through taking out the cost of the cameras, and also giving us sort of a customer discount, if you will, for extending the contract for 2 years. Two additional years.
And Brittany's savvy negotiation
Yes, I will take all of the
skills, I
credit.
think, yeah.
So basically
Let's
saying we
give
owe
credit
you
where credit's due.
$800,000.
Yeah.
You can just add it to my next, call it a bonus. So, no, it was, it was a combination of things. They agreed to reduce some items that they were sort of adding on, like the cameras, as well as just recognizing that, if we were going to agree to stay on and provide some stability for them as well as us, that we both had concessions.
So your recommendation from the administration is to go with the Model 2?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
Comments? We talked about this a little, I guess it's committee was.
The finance
with
committee.
Victoria and I, and Brittany. But I think this addressed a number of things. Obviously, it's less than total number. The 5-year was a concern, but also a benefit relative to, I'm speaking a little bit to Chris, who brought up, idea of taking because things can change, you might not want to have all your big hit in the beginning, which was really that 41% hit us all square in the face, and this obviously is much more palatable and I think speaks to that. And I would say that over these 5 years of this contract, we will find ways to reduce this. Whether it's just in changing bus routes or in reorganizing how our facilities are used or whatever, I think there will be ways that we will have the benefit of hopefully finding ways that we can decrease the utilization of what we get from Betcha, and thus they will not charge us the same
They will
amount.
allow that. Yeah, they will allow us if we reduce in whatever capacity.
To a point, they said.
To a point. So, I mean, obviously, if we decrease by 75%, they're going to retain.
No, but if you cut out 2 bus routes, okay?
No
They said that was fine.
Then in fact, that's going to accommodate the fact that we'll be able to reduce this. So
Yes.
because we can't predict it completely, I would be in favor of this sort of steady state increase relative to that sort of ratcheting up each time. That's basically something, assuming that we can make bigger and bigger cuts every year, I think is unrealistic.
So, I'm sorry, you are in favor
I'm
then
in favor of
Model
number 2.
number
I'm
two.
number
1.
1. Yeah, but I'm not in favor of, I'm sorry, I misspoke. I was looking at the 3 of the models because of the fact that the 17% just seems awfully high in that last year, even if we tried to cut something.
I do think that if we did make changes, that they could either, take, make the reduction 1 year or similarly spread the reduction over the remaining years to help with that. But you are right that probably Model 1, as we're calling it, is safer. So it depends on.
It's definitely safer, but.
Depends on what your appetite is.
I guess if the board feels that we could change that number from 17% that FY23 down to 10%, well then that'd be great, but.
We'll all have the opportunity in this time to get off the board before that final money comes out.
Well, I guess I usually go with safety, but that's my feeling.
All right, further thoughts? I will I'll say I'm typically, something like this, a little risk averse, but I think that Model 2, and we've got some immediate issues we're dealing with, and I think, I personally feel that the further we can push out the bigger hits, the more time we're gonna have to be able to deal with them.
I agree, I'm in favor of Model 2.
The delta between 22, between the two is 37 in FY '22. And then it's around 70 in
23.
23.
It
So
doesn't get.
Oh, money-wise,
It doesn't
it's
get-
not
Yeah,
big
it's
money.
Right, it's not that huge.
It's not
Yeah.
huge, the delta. Yes.
If this were my home budget and I knew in 5 years I would have to pay that, I would try to put money away. Can we do something like that where the next year we put 3% away in like a transportation savings fund, and the next year, whatever the difference is, so put that difference away so that should we have to face that, we have it, and if we don't, then we could use that money for other budgetary needs.
The one issue with that is you're using one-time monies then, and then it comes back to bite you the next year. Which
Unless
is
you
what-
were to find another area to cut or a decrease in the contract the following year.
Right.
Right, rather than putting money away, you commit to trying to save the 3%, rather than take the 3% and put it in the bank. You try to decrease it so that going forward.
Are you saying because after year 5,
The cost doesn't go down, it just increases by 3% beyond.
after year 5?
We don't actually know what it's gonna
After year
happen
five,
after
we
5.
would have to go back out to bid.
Yeah.
Okay, so it could be this 45% increase, or it could be a normal 2% increase.
It could be, yeah. We
Right.
don't,
With a
we don't know.
2%, you're saying the normal budget wouldn't have that fixed into it, so it would seem like more than a 2%.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, if you're using one-time money, so if your budgeted amount is here and you use one-time monies to get up to here, the next
Yeah.
year you're back down to here because it was one-time money.
Right, but in
So-
essence, we've been budgeting for it, but we've just been putting it away rather than spending it. Does that
But
not
at what
work
point
that
do
way
we?
though?
But at what point do we spend it?
When we need to at the end.
Right, so we buy it down that year, but then the next year we just have to then.
Yeah,
We have
that's
another
what I
gap
was
the next,
understanding.
we have another,
Okay.
yeah.
But you
So
would,
now.
I know what you're saying, because you
Yeah.
would build in some transfer to a contingency fund. So there would
Before it
be-
gets to that point.
There would be some built-in expense,
Yeah.
but it would likely be disproportionate to the amount of revenue that you would need to use to offset it.
Right, I was just thinking we would actually be budgeting in a higher percent, but just
Okay.
not spending
Yeah.
it.
Right.
But,
It was kind of similar to
Maybe the
if you
math
look
doesn't
at the originally proposed, if we tried to just deal with it, let's say with Ed Reserve
Yeah.
in the first year, or even next year,
right,
it looks like, okay, we've kind of taken care of it,
right,
but we've used that one-time money
Yeah,
one year, the next year
exactly.
we've got to find that money again
Again.
somewhere.
right.
We got the 41.5 plus
Right.
the 2.5.
And that's
Yeah.
the other argument, I think, to be made between Model 1 and Model 2 is that, even though we're taking maybe 2.5, which was budgeted in FY '19, the difference between those 2 years, the FY '19 and FY '20, that's your first big budget hit, and also between FY '18 and FY '20. So that's where you're really going to feel it. So it kind of mitigates that a little bit,
Mhm.
in the immediacy.
Yeah.
Right.
Technology. Elon Musk is gonna save us.
Well,
We're all gonna be taking drones to
We need
school.
Chris here.
it's actually true. 5 years from now, it's going to be a new world
Yeah,
for buses.
yeah.
However, it's gonna be up to Betcha to figure that out. 'cause
No,
they're gonna-
that's, should be us figuring this out.
Well, in 5 years, when we're doing a new contract, but right now, we can't. We're
Right.
not gonna be able to dictate that they buy an electric bus.
It's difficult to put money in the bank, but we can start planning to change the routes, be more effective, think about the next
Yeah, oh, I
technology
know.
coming down. That's where we gotta go.
Right.
Well, so to move this issue forward, we need a motion.
Move we adopt Model 2.
All right, we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Further discussion?
I'll go with 2. I'm not sold on it. no, on Model 1, I just more cautious about the changes.
I get you. We are taking a bit of a risk here. But 5 years in today's world of technology is a long time. Okay, all those in favor of the motion as presented to award the bid to Betcha based on Model 2 presented before us, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? And we'll be able to transport our children
Excellent.
for next
Mine
year.
walk.
I'd
You
like
save us a
to,
lot of money.
I'd like to thank Brittany as her first sort of,
Yeah, absolutely.
in the front battle here,
Thank you.
came out pretty good.
Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So we get new buses with cameras?
Yes.
They will have cameras, yes.
And seatbelts, right?
That's right,
Seatbelts.
retractable seatbelts, not just the ones that flop around.
Yeah,
Well, I'm
it took
not
a while
the
to
clerk.
bring
Okay.
seatbelts over to
Clerk
buses, but
is Linda
they
Barrett,
have
so it's
finally
like a
arrived.
lead position,
Yeah.
it's
She'll come
not
in.
a board position.
Perfect.
There's some mixed feelings about them. In some
you're right.
instances, it's better not to have them.
Yes, I did the secretary thing.
Well, it's
No, I
more the
didn't sign
ability
up for that.
for a
I'm still
kind of
a
child to get out of a
clerk
seatbelt to escape.
Yeah,
That I get.
if you're crunched, but
I
sometimes
got it by
it
default
might.
because I asked him who's.
But it's the
Yeah.
rollovers and all that, when they don't have seatbelts where they get thrown out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like every other.
Oh yeah.
He's like, oh, thanks for asking.
Okay, other business, we need to discuss July. We're getting a little concerned that we may not be able to field a quorum for the 2nd. So just a show of hands if you cannot make the meeting
July 2nd?
on July 2nd. All right. Thank you. We will, are people feeling?
7.
It may be, we'll sort of take a poll of everybody who's not here as well. There's nothing really nipping at our heels to do. We could have a productive meeting, but anybody object if we end up canceling it due to lack of a quorum? Yeah, I didn't think there'd be much opposition. What's that?
I'd be brokenhearted.
Just so I understand, we have 2 meetings in August.
We do.
So we could introduce our policy
Both.
governance things at first, because we were going to do it in the next meeting.
That's right.
But we're okay. We have 2
Okay,
meetings.
all right, good.
Yep.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
you concur with that? Yeah.
During reading bills in August, as I had stated earlier, it'd be nice, Victoria's away the whole month, so it'll be
July.
like, right? or-
July.
July,
Yeah.
yeah. There'll be a number of slots open, so I guess I'd like the minutes to reflect.
I would be happy to do, in fact, I'd really
Okay, all right, well,
look
maybe
forward to it. So let me know when.
I'll get to you and then we
Okay.
can figure it out. Then I wanted to make sure other people were,
Yeah.
it's a reasonable time at times to do it, just to introduce
Yeah.
those that haven't done it.
Oh, so not just approvers, but to also introduce the process. to
Yeah, I
other
just
people.
looked at it that way since I plan to be mostly involved with that and I can, whoever was new to it, we can do it together. I usually do it sort of, I don't know, between 8:30 and 9:30 on Monday morning. It doesn't have to be that early, but that way you don't kill the whole day waiting around to do bills.
Every other Monday you do
It's
it?
every Monday.
Every Monday.
So Chip, what do you need
I need
from
one,
us
I need one person.
to commit to the
Yeah,
whole
and
month?
I wasn't at, yeah, that.
I just wanna make sure
things
you've
already-
got things
Yeah,
covered.
well, I just want to make sure it was out there, so.
Okay.
the
I would be
people who-
happy to be second runner-up
Okay.
if Peg's not available one of the Mondays.
So you have a consistent person for, you're saying you want one?
I think we're fine. I don't think, it's just,
I'll be here the 16th.
yeah, we'll be all right.
And we're okay, we don't need to worry about approving bills for a month. We can get, bring you by. We don't have to. Okay.
As long as I think as long as the two of us are looking at them, I think that's okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
All right. Anybody? Yes?
And just one other relative to the bias findings or
Yeah.
whatever. Will you report back to us
Yep.
as to what's going to be
I will.
happening? Obviously, members of the audience were asking for that too, so.
Yep.
But I think that's in a way that I can understand it in a practical way.
It's less jargon.
Yeah, I don't mind the jargon, I just need to, I have to have a conceptual part
Yeah.
as to what education means and what, mean, bias is a heated term. In actual fact, we use bias all the time in a positive way for deciding someone's going to get the job or not get the job. It has nothing to do with the negative bias, it has to do with qualifications. So, you know, I mean, I think that whole thing of bias and putting it into a practical process in addressing it, to me, it's really important to figure it out, or else I just don't have a good way to.
Well, a lot of the trainings they start with people looking at implicit bias, so you know, looking at the science behind how we, as humans, how we make decisions about things, and then using that and extrapolating that in your own life and looking at your privilege or lack of privilege and how that in turn helps you to both see things and be blind to other things, and that's kind of the growing awareness I think that they were referencing in terms of competency and you know, looking at that at a systems level. How do you do that in a way that's not just going through a training? We put people through countless numbers of trainings, but to have it be embedded within our culture, that's the important piece. And how do you sustain that over time and build it into all of the systems that really we're reworking right now too. So it's a good time for us to be taking this on, and we have been taking this on, but taking it on in a slightly different way. Because we're in a real building phase as a district right now.
Was the concept of a bias task force something new?
You mean, what do you mean?
I'm sorry, not task force, the response team.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard the term before. I understand the idea. I mean, I think we'll look at all of our groups and kind of our structure for next year and see how to best make that happen. But I like the idea of a representative group. You know, I think that one of the challenges we have, which they reference, is the privacy and individual events in very small schools where everybody knows each other are challenging to talk about if you know that the conversation is going to get right back to a student. So that's the part that I think we'll be talking about and figuring out how do we both provide the privacy and also engage the work.
I was sort of, I don't understand the relationship that they were talking about. They mentioned in several instances in the report the fact that this could be tied in with the IB, which again, I don't understand either. So leaves me with two short ends. But it seems to me that if you've got something that you're working on in the IB and you can build on that in terms of this, and the two indeed do mesh as they are hoping and implying, that you've got a bit of a foundation there.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that this aligns. It's really part of IB. I wouldn't say it aligns, because align sounds like it's side by side. I think it's one and the same. I think it's for us, it's figuring out how do we do the work we're doing with IB and make, you know, the equity work that we need to do. How do we let IB allow that to flourish more deeply? But yeah, it's not doing one and doing another.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I assumed that.
Yep.
I don't know.
And that's the power. I mean, that's a big reason why we're moving to IB, is to provide our students with the ability to think more deeply about who they are and about how they fit into both our local realities, our state realities, our global realities, and you know, the world that they're entering. And we're not the most diverse state in the country. So I think it's that more important for that reason as well.
All right. Who would like to offer a motion to adjourn?
I just got here.
That makes it perfect.
And I think Suzanne is. Are you still there, Suzanne?
Was she ever?
Yeah.
She
didn't introduce herself.
It's still on.
I'm still here.
Oh, good for you. Thanks for sticking with us, Suzanne.
That's great. No problem.
Is there anything you wanted to add before I take my phone back?
I liked all your questions about the report because those were a lot of my own questions. And I'm glad that we clarified the $800,000 drop in the transportation contract because I was wondering where that money disappeared to.
Yeah.
Brittany.
Yeah.
Nice job.
Yeah.
Disappeared,
Awesome.
was found.
Okay.
All right, we have a motion to adjourn. All those in favor, say aye.
And please feel free to grab some pizza or some salad and take it with you.
Yeah.
All over the
Bye, Suzanne.
Bye.
Yep.
Hey,